Failure. It's a word that makes most of us uneasy. It stirs emotions of fear, disappointment, and sometimes even shame. But what if I told you that failure is not the opposite of success? It is part of it. Every great achievement is built on a foundation of setbacks. Every person who has ever done something extraordinary has at some point failed, but what sets them apart is how they responded. The ability to bounce back, to rise again after falling, is what defines real success. Today, we're going to explore the art of bouncing back from failure, and by the end of this, I hope you'll see failure not as a dead end, but as a stepping stone. Failure is not a dead end. It is not a verdict stamped onto our identities, declaring us incapable or unworthy. And yet, that is how most people see it. When we stumble, when we fall short, when the outcome doesn't align with our expectations, we internalize it, we make it personal. We attach failure to our self-worth as if one setback defines the entirety of who we are. But that is a dangerous and misleading perspective. Because failure is not an identity, it is information. Think about the way a scientist approaches an experiment. If a hypothesis proves to be incorrect, they don't walk away believing they are incapable. They don't say, well, I must be a failure. No, they look at the results. They analyze what went wrong. They adjust. They refine their approach. They move forward with better data. That's exactly how we should see failure in our own lives. Data, feedback, insight that sharpens us, strengthens us, and propels us towards success. The most remarkable individuals, those who innovate, those who lead, those who change the world, do not avoid failure. They anticipate it, they expect it, and most importantly, they use it. Every failure they encounter is a stepping stone, a necessary piece of the puzzle that brings them closer to their vision. They don't waste energy resisting failure or fearing it. Instead, they embrace it as a natural and essential part of progress. Consider the stories we admire most: the entrepreneurs who built empires, the athletes who shattered records, the artists who redefined their craft. All of them, without exception, have failed. And not just once, they have failed repeatedly, sometimes spectacularly. But what separates them from everyone else is their response. They do not see failure as a stop sign. They see it as a signpost, guiding them to something greater. But here's the challenge. Society has conditioned us to believe that failure is shameful. From a young age, we are taught to avoid mistakes, to get the right answer the first time, to play it safe. We are rarely encouraged to take risks that might not work out. And so as adults, we carry this fear of failure like a weight on our shoulders. It keeps us from trying. It keeps us from pushing boundaries. It keeps us from pursuing what we truly want, because the possibility of falling short feels unbearable. But what if we change the narrative? What if we redefine failure not as an ending, but as a beginning? What if we viewed it not as a reflection of our worth, but as proof that we are growing, evolving, and learning? Because the truth is, failure is not what holds us back. Our fear of failure is. And the only way to overcome that fear is to shift our perspective. The moment we stop seeing failure as a verdict and start seeing it as a teacher, everything changes. We become free to take bold steps, to dream bigger, to reach higher. We stop hesitating. We stop second guessing. We step fully into our potential, knowing that every setback is simply another step forward. The path to success is not a straight line. It is messy, unpredictable, and filled with moments that will test us. But if we learn to redefine failure, not as a reflection of who we are, but as a tool that sharpens us, then we will always find a way forward. And that is how we win. Taking responsibility for our mistakes is one of the hardest things to do. It's uncomfortable. It forces us to confront the reality that we weren't as prepared, as careful, or as aware as we thought we were. It's so much easier to point the finger elsewhere, to blame the circumstances, the people around us, or just chalk it up to bad luck. But the moment we do that, we surrender our power. We give up control over the one thing we truly have influence over, ourselves. Think about a time when something didn't go your way. Maybe a project failed, a relationship fell apart, or an opportunity slipped through your fingers. It's natural to look outward, to find something or someone to hold responsible. But when we do that, we miss the real lesson. Because the truth is, growth doesn't come from making excuses. It comes from ownership. It comes from looking at the situation with honesty and asking, what could I have done differently? Not to punish ourselves, but to learn. Not to dwell on the failure, but to prepare for success. The greatest leaders, the ones who inspire us, the ones we trust, are not the ones who pretend to be perfect. They are the ones who step up and say, That was on me. They're the ones who acknowledge their mistakes, take responsibility, and make it clear that they will do better. And when they do, something powerful happens. Instead of losing respect, they gain it. Instead of appearing weak, they become stronger. Because accountability is not a burden, it's a sign of strength. The same is true for us. When we own our mistakes, we take back control. Instead of feeling like life is happening to us, we realize that we have a role to play in shaping our outcomes. We stop waiting for things to change, and we start being the ones who change. And when we do that, we grow, we become better. But there's another reason this matters. When we take responsibility, we give permission to those around us to do the same. We create a culture where people don't fear mistakes, but instead see them as stepping stones to improvement. Imagine a team where everyone owns their part, where no one is afraid to say, that was my fault, and here's how I'm fixing it. That is a team that moves forward. That is a team that wins. The reality is, we are going to make mistakes. We will get things wrong. We will have moments we wish we could take back, but the way we respond to those moments defines us. We can either run from them, pretending they never happened, or we can face them with courage, learn from them, and come back stronger. So the next time something doesn't go as planned, don't look around for something to blame. Look inward. Ask yourself what you can take from it, because the moment you take responsibility, you take back your power, and that is the moment real growth begins. Failure is painful. It shakes our confidence, makes us question our abilities, and sometimes even makes us wonder if we're capable of success at all. But the biggest mistake we make when we fail is not the failure itself. It's what we tell ourselves afterward. Too often, we don't just see failure as something that happened. We see it as proof of who we are. We take that one moment, that one setback, and we internalize it. We let it define us. And when we do that, we make failure something it was never meant to be, permanent. But failure is not a label. It's not a reflection of your worth. It's simply an event, a moment in time, a lesson waiting to be learned. When a child is learning to walk and falls down, we don't call them a failure. We don't tell them to stop trying. We encourage them to get back up because we know that falling is part of the process. And yet somewhere along the way, we forget that. As we get older, we start believing that failing means we aren't good enough, that we aren't capable, that maybe we should stop trying. And that belief, not the failure itself, is what holds us back. The truth is, failure doesn't define you. How you respond to it does. The most successful people in the world have failed more times than most of us have even tried. The difference is they don't allow failure to become part of their identity. They don't see themselves as they see themselves as people who failed at something and learned from it. That mindset shift changes everything, because when you stop seeing failure as proof that you're not good enough and start seeing it as a step toward growth, you take away its power to hold you back. Imagine if every time you failed, instead of saying, I'm not good at this, you said, I'm not good at this yet. Imagine if instead of saying, I'm not meant for this, you said, I haven't figured it out yet. That single word changes the meaning entirely. It turns failure from an identity into a process. It reminds you that just because you haven't succeeded yet doesn't mean you won't. You are not your mistakes. You are not your setbacks. You are not defined by the moments that didn't go your way. You are defined by what you do next. Do you give up or do you get up? Do you let failure shape your self-worth? Or do you use it to shape your future? That choice is yours. And the moment you decide that failure is simply an experience, not a reflection of who you are, is the moment you set yourself free. Because failure isn't what stops people from succeeding. It's the belief that failure defines them that does. And once you let go of that, nothing can hold you back. Failure is uncomfortable. It brings frustration, disappointment, and sometimes even embarrassment. But failure itself is not the enemy. It is our response to it that determines whether we grow or stay stuck. Every failure, no matter how painful, carries a lesson. But only those who are willing to look beyond the frustration, beyond the self-doubt, beyond the urge to move on too quickly will find it. Most people see failure as an ending. They hit a wall, face rejection, or fall short of expectations, and they assume it's a sign to stop. They walk away believing they weren't good enough, that they didn't have what it takes. But the people who succeed, the people who rise above, don't see failure that way. They see it as information. They see it as a test, as feedback, as a necessary part of the process. And instead of running from it, they study it. The truth is, failure only hurts when we don't learn from it. When we see it as a reflection of our worth, rather than as a stepping stone to improvement, we rob ourselves of the opportunity to get better. The most resilient people, the ones who keep moving forward no matter how many times they fall, ask themselves a different set of questions. They don't dwell on what went wrong just to relive the pain. They ask, what did this experience teach me? What could I have done differently? What patterns am I repeating that are holding me back? They treat failure as a teacher, not a verdict. Some of the greatest breakthroughs in history came not despite failure, but because of it. Thomas Edison famously made thousands of failed attempts before creating the light bulb. When asked about those failures, he didn't see them as wasted effort. He saw them as progress. He learned from each mistake, refined his approach, and eventually found success. The Wright brothers, pioneers of flight, endured countless crashes before they finally took off. The difference between those who give up and those who make history isn't talent or luck, it's the ability to extract the lesson and keep going. But here's the challenge. Learning from failure requires humility. It means being willing to admit that we don't have all the answers, that we have blind spots, that there's always room to improve. That's not easy. It's far more comfortable to blame circumstances, make excuses, or convince ourselves that success just isn't meant for us. But the moment we do that, we give up our power. Because the second we stop looking for the lesson, we stop growing. If you want to succeed, if you want to get better, you have to make a habit of learning from every setback. Not just occasionally, not just when it's convenient, but every single time. The people who do this don't just bounce back from failure. They become stronger because of it. So when things don't go as planned, don't turn away. Lean in. Ask the hard questions. Extract the lesson, because that lesson is the key to everything you're working toward. Failure hurts. It shakes our confidence, makes us question our choices, and sometimes even makes us wonder if we should keep going. But the reason failure feels so devastating isn't because of what actually happened. It's because of how we see it. We treat failure like a dead end, a sign that we've reached the limits of our abilities, that we're not good enough, that maybe we should give up. But what if failure isn't the end? What if it's a beginning? Some of the greatest successes in history were born out of failure. Steve Jobs was fired from the very company he built, humiliated and cast aside. Most people would have taken that as a sign to move on. Instead, he used that failure to refine his vision, to grow, to build something even better. Years later, he returned and transformed Apple into one of the most influential companies in the world. Oprah was once told she wasn't fit for television. Imagine if she had believed that. Imagine if she had let that failure define her. Instead, she used it as fuel, as proof that she needed to carve her own path. And in doing so, she became one of the most powerful voices in media. These stories aren't exceptions. They are proof that failure is not rejection, it's redirection. What looks like a setback might actually be setting you up for something greater. But you have to be willing to see it that way. Because the truth is, the way you interpret failure will shape your future far more than the failure itself. Think about it. If you see failure as proof that you're not good enough, you'll stop trying. If you see failure as an obstacle that can't be overcome, you'll turn back. But if you see failure as a stepping stone, as part of the process, as a necessary detour towards something better, then suddenly it stops feeling like the end. It becomes a lesson, an opportunity, a shift in direction that might just lead you somewhere greater than you originally planned. That shift in perspective is everything, because the reality is, failure is unavoidable. It's part of growth. It's part of success. The only question is what you will do with it. Will you let it break you, or will you let it build you? Will you let it convince you to give up, or will you let it push you to find a better way? What if the failure you're facing right now is actually the best thing that could have happened to you? What if years from now you look back and realize that this moment, this struggle, this setback was the very thing that led you to the breakthrough you needed? You get to decide. You can see failure as the end, or you can see it as the beginning of something new. And if you choose the latter, you just might find that failure wasn't failure at all. It was a gift, a redirection, a stepping stone to something far greater than you ever imagined. Failure doesn't just affect the mind, it hits the heart. It's easy to talk about bouncing back, but when you're in the middle of a setback, when the disappointment feels overwhelming, when doubt creeps in and whispers that maybe you're not good enough, it's not logic that stops you, it's emotion. And that's why resilience isn't just about thinking differently, it's about feeling differently. Failure stings. It knocks the wind out of you. It makes you question everything, your abilities, your decisions, even your worth. And for a moment, it can feel like the weight of it will crush you. But emotional resilience is what allows you to stand back up, even when it hurts. It's not about pretending that failure doesn't affect you. It's about allowing yourself to feel the disappointment, process it, and then make a decision. Will this define me? Or will I move forward anyway? Some people believe resilience means being immune to failure, as if the strongest among us don't feel the pain of setbacks. But that's not true. The strongest people aren't the ones who never feel discouraged. They're the ones who refuse to let discouragement stop them. They experience the same self-doubt, the same frustration, the same disappointment, but they don't stay there. They don't let those emotions take root and dictate their future. Imagine an athlete training for years for a competition only to fall short of victory. The pain is real, the disappointment is heavy, but what separates those who come back stronger from those who give up is their ability to process the pain without letting it define them. They acknowledge the frustration, they allow themselves to feel it, but then they make a choice. What happens next? That single decision to keep going despite the pain is what makes the difference. Resilience is a muscle. It grows stronger every time you choose to rise after a fall. But like any muscle, it requires effort, it requires training, and it requires an understanding that failure does not make you weak. Staying down does. The key is to reframe the emotions that come with failure. Instead of seeing disappointment as proof that you're not good enough, see it as proof that you're pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. Instead of seeing self-doubt as a sign that you should stop, recognize that doubt only exists in those who are attempting something meaningful. You don't have to pretend failure doesn't hurt. You don't have to fake confidence or act like setbacks don't affect you. You just have to decide that they won't break you. You have to decide that no matter how hard you fall, you will stand back up. That no matter how painful the setback, you will not allow it to define you. Because emotional resilience isn't about avoiding failure. It's about refusing to let failure be the end of your story. And when you make that choice, nothing can stop you. Failure shakes us. It makes us question ourselves, our abilities, even our worth. It plants seeds of doubt that whisper, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I don't have what it takes. And if we let those doubts take root, they grow. They convince us to stop trying, to play it safe, to shrink. That's the real danger of failure, not the setback itself, but what it does to our confidence. But here's the truth. Confidence isn't something you either have or don't have. It's not a switch that's flipped on or off. Confidence is built, and it's built through action. You don't wake up one day suddenly believing in yourself after a failure. You rebuild that belief by doing, by proving to yourself little by little that you are capable. When we fail, the temptation is to wait until we feel ready again, until the doubt fades, until the confidence magically returns. But confidence doesn't come from waiting. It doesn't come from hoping. It comes from movement. The fastest way to rebuild belief in yourself is to take action, any action, no matter how small. Think about a time when you felt unstoppable, when you knew without a doubt that you could do something. That belief didn't just appear, it was earned. Maybe it was through practice, through persistence, through experience, but it was action that built it. And that's how you rebuild it now. Not by waiting for the fear to go away, not by hoping for motivation to show up, but by stepping forward despite the doubt. Start small if you have to. Make a plan. Take the first step. If you fell down, get up and try again. If you lost an opportunity, create a new one. If you made a mistake, learn from it and move forward. Action is the antidote to self-doubt. The greatest athletes, the most successful entrepreneurs, the most inspiring leaders, they didn't build confidence by avoiding failure. They built it by pushing forward, even when they weren't sure they could. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team. Imagine if he had let that moment define him. Imagine if he had let that failure convince him he wasn't good enough. Instead, he put in the work, he took action, he built himself into the greatest player of all time, not because he never failed, but because he refused to let failure be the final word. Rebuilding confidence isn't about pretending you're fearless. It's about proving to yourself through action that fear and failure don't control you, that you are bigger than your setbacks, that no matter how many times you fall, you will rise again. So don't wait. Don't sit in hesitation hoping that confidence will return on its own. Take action, any action. Because with every small win, with every step forward, you remind yourself of who you are. And confidence isn't something you find. It's something you build, one step at a time. No one succeeds alone. No one overcomes failure in isolation. The people we surround ourselves with have the power to shape our mindset, influence our resilience, and determine whether we rise from failure or let it consume us. Because when we fall, and we all do, it's the voices around us that either push us to get back up or convince us to stay down. It's easy to underestimate just how much our environment impacts us. We like to think that we control our own destiny, that we are strong enough to push forward no matter what. But the truth is, the people we allow into our lives play a massive role in shaping our beliefs about ourselves and our ability to persevere. If you're surrounded by people who only see limitations, who reinforce your doubts, who tell you to play it safe, then failure will feel like the end. But if you're surrounded by those who see potential in you, even when you don't see it in yourself, then failure becomes just another step in the process. The right people challenge you. They hold you to a higher standard. They remind you of who you are when you've forgotten. These are the people who don't just comfort you when you fail, they push you to learn, to grow, to rise stronger than before. They don't let you wallow in self-pity. They remind you that failure is temporary, that success is still possible, that this moment does not define you. Think about the most resilient people in the world, those who have faced enormous setbacks and still found a way to succeed. Do you think they did it alone? Every great leader, every innovator, every person who has turned failure into success had people in their corner, mentors, friends, colleagues who believed in them even when the world didn't. So ask yourself, who are you surrounding yourself with? Do they push you to be better? Do they remind you of your strength? Or do they feed your fears, your insecurities, your doubts? Because whether you realize it or not, the voices around you will either lift you up or hold you down. And it's not just about finding people who support you. It's about finding those who have been through failure themselves, because those are the ones who understand, the ones who have walked through the fire and come out stronger. They know what it's like to fall, and more importantly, they know what it takes to rise again. Let their resilience inspire yours. Let their stories remind you that failure is not the end of the road. It's just a curve along the way. Surround yourself with people who see the best in you, who won't let you quit, who challenge you to rise higher than you ever thought possible. Because when you have the right people in your corner, failure is never final. It's just fuel for the next chapter of your story. Failure has a way of making everything feel small. It shrinks our perspective, pulls us into the moment, and makes it seem like the setback in front of us is the only thing that matters. But the truth is, failure is just a single chapter. It's not the whole story. And when we let ourselves get consumed by a single moment of defeat, we forget the bigger picture. We forget why we started in the first place. Every great achievement, every breakthrough, every person who has ever built something meaningful has faced failure along the way. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't isn't that one group avoids failure. It's that they refuse to let failure define them. They understand that success isn't about getting everything right the first time. It's about staying the course, about holding on to the vision, even when things don't go as planned. Think about the people who inspire you, leaders, innovators, athletes, artists. Their stories are not free of failure. In fact, failure is often the most important part of their journey. Walt Disney was fired from his job at a newspaper because they said he lacked creativity. J.K. Rowling was rejected by multiple publishers before Harry Potter became a global phenomenon. Elon Musk was on the verge of bankruptcy before Tesla and SpaceX became industry leaders. If any of them had allowed their failures to dictate their future, their stories would have ended before they even began. So when failure comes, and it will, what matters is not that you fell, but what you do next. Will you let this moment stop you, or will you remind yourself of the bigger picture? Because long-term success isn't about never stumbling. It's about getting back up every single time. That's why having a clear vision is so important. Your vision is what keeps you moving forward when the road gets rough. It's what gives you the strength to push through rejection, through doubt, through the moments when quitting feels easier than continuing. If you focus only on the immediate setback, you'll lose sight of the destination. But if you zoom out, if you remind yourself of the impact you want to make, of the dream you're working toward, then failure becomes fuel. It becomes part of the process rather than the end of it. The most successful people in the world are not the ones who never fail. They're the ones who refuse to stop. They use every misstep as a lesson, every setback as motivation. They keep their eyes on where they're going, not just where they are. So when you fail, take a breath, step back, look at the bigger picture. This is just one moment in a much larger journey. Keep going, stay committed. Let failure sharpen your vision, not take you off course. Because success isn't about never falling, it's about always getting back up and continuing toward what truly matters. Failure is inevitable. It is a part of life, a part of growth, and a part of any meaningful pursuit. But what happens after failure? That is the real test. Because failure itself does not define us. It is what we do next that does. When we fall, we are given a choice. Do we stay down, consumed by disappointment, frustration, and self-doubt? Or do we rise again, standing taller, wiser, and more determined than before? This is the moment that separates those who achieve greatness from those who simply accept defeat. It's not talent, luck, or even intelligence that determines success. It's the relentless decision to keep going. Every person who has ever done something extraordinary has faced moments where quitting seemed like the only option. They have doubted themselves, they have questioned whether they had what it takes, they have heard the voices of critics and even their own inner fears telling them to stop. And yet, they chose to rise. There is power in making that choice. There is power in deciding that no failure will be final, that no setback will be the end of your story. You are not defined by the times you fall. You are defined by how many times you stand back up. Think of the most iconic success stories in history. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before he finally created the light bulb. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison before leading his country to freedom. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team before becoming one of the greatest athletes of all time. If they had given up, if they had let failure convince them that they weren't meant for success, the world would have never known their impact. But rising again is not just about grand achievements. It is about the small daily choices we make. It is about refusing to let one rejection, one mistake, or one disappointment dictate the rest of our lives. It is about waking up every day and choosing to keep moving forward, even when the path ahead is uncertain. Resilience is not a trait you are born with. It is a decision you make. And the best part, you don't have to feel ready to make that decision. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly how you'll succeed. You just have to decide that failure will not be the final chapter of your story. So stand up, shake off the doubt, the fear, the disappointment. Choose to believe in yourself even when it feels impossible. Choose to take one more step, no matter how small. Choose to rise again, not because it is easy, but because the future you dream of is worth it. Because the people who change the world are not the ones who never fall. They are the ones who refuse to stay down. Failure is not the enemy. It is not the end. It is an invitation to grow, to learn, and to come back stronger. The art of bouncing back is not about avoiding failure. It's about using it. It's about choosing resilience over regret, learning over self-pity, and action over fear. So the next time you fail, don't see it as proof that you should stop. See it as proof that you're on the path to something greater. Because in the end, success doesn't go to the ones who never fall. It goes to the ones who refuse to stay down.